The inspection ground buzzed with strict protocol and tension. Soldiers stood in sharp formation under the searing morning sun, their uniforms crisp, eyes locked ahead. The silence was broken only by the echoing footsteps of senior officers making their rounds. Every movement was timed, every breath measured. This wasn't a place for weakness. It was a place where discipline ruled, and any deviation was swiftly punished. Among the ranks stood a young woman, barely distinguishable from her peers at first glance. Her posture was rigid, her face unreadable. But for some of those in power, that was already a problem. She had always kept to herself, kept her head down, never challenged authority but never bowed excessively to it either. And in a world that thrived on power dynamics and favoritism, her quiet strength threatened those who relied on fear and ego. Rumors had swirled that she wasn't one of them, that she had no real place in this elite group. Some whispered about her background, others mocked her behind her back. To the men around her who viewed rank as entitlement, her presence was an insult. Then came the command, sudden, sharp, and unnecessary. Strip her. Now. The words cut through the air like a blade. For a split second, everyone hesitated, unsure if they'd heard right. But the officer who barked the order wasn't one to be questioned. Not openly. His tone carried more than authority. It carried malice, the kind that seeks to destroy rather than correct. She didn't resist. Maybe she knew fighting back would only feed the fire. Maybe she had endured worse before. Her hands moved slowly, methodically, as she unbuttoned her uniform jacket, the fabric heavy with judgment. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the rows. Some turned their eyes away. Others stared with twisted curiosity. No one stepped forward to stop it. Layer by layer, her dignity was peeled away. Not just her clothing, but the unspoken code of decency among soldiers was being violated. Right there in broad daylight. The silence was heavier now, not from discipline, but from collective discomfort, maybe even guilt. Yet the officer watched with satisfaction, convinced he had made an example out of her, that she would finally be put in her place. She stood exposed to the sun and to the eyes that judged her. Her skin was bruised not from battle, but from the weight of prejudice. And yet, she did not flinch. She did not bow her head. She stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, spine rigid, as if daring anyone to break her spirit. Whispers began to swell, not about her body, but about something else. Something they hadn't expected. Because as the last layer came off and her back was fully revealed, something caught the light. It wasn't shame. It wasn't fear. It was something else entirely. Something inked deep into her skin, and deeper still into her past. And it was in that exact moment, as the light shifted and eyes focused, that the balance of power began to falter. A hush fell over the inspection field, one heavier than before. Her spine, now exposed to the light of day and to the eyes of hundreds, revealed something no one had expected. A tattoo. Not just any tattoo. It was positioned vertically, aligned perfectly along the curve of her spine, as though it had been carved by destiny itself. The ink was aged but crisp, dark lines forming an intricate design that pulsed with meaning for those who recognized it. For a few, the sight meant nothing. But for others, especially those with deeper ties to classified missions and elite operations, the recognition was instant and chilling. The tattoo was a mark that shouldn't exist on anyone outside a particular group. It was not listed in any official records. It wasn't found on training manuals or military documentation. It belonged to whispers, to stories told only behind closed doors, often with a warning not to repeat them. It was known among a few senior officers, and even then only in fragments. A mark tied to missions that weren't supposed to have happened. People who weren't supposed to exist. Some said the tattoo was the only way to identify those who had operated at the highest levels, those embedded so deep within Black Ops that even generals weren't briefed. It ran along her spine like a coded scripture, symbols interwoven with geometric precision, with a circular emblem right at the center of her lower back. Those who could decode it would understand it stood for allegiance, service, and survival through operations too classified to name. The tattoo wasn't ornamental, it was functional. A map of assignments, a log of survival, and a warning to any enemy who dared challenge the one who bore it. But in that moment, most of the people around her weren't enemies. They were just shocked. Shocked that the girl they had underestimated, the soldier they had ridiculed and stripped, bore something that no ordinary recruit should carry. And worse, she hadn't flaunted it. She had kept it hidden, silently, knowing that revealing it would only bring more trouble or draw attention she didn't want. The commander, the one who had barked the order to undress her, found his breath catch in his throat. His eyes locked onto the tattoo as if it were a ghost rising from the past. His posture shifted, subtly but unmistakably. No longer the towering figure of intimidation. He seemed to shrink, his authority suddenly fragile. He had seen that mark before, not in person but in reports during whispered briefings in cold rooms where even the walls were considered potential threats. There had been a mission long ago, a failed extraction in hostile territory. Every agent presumed lost. The only survivor was listed as unknown female operative. No name, no rank, just a single symbol, the same symbol now displayed on her spine. That operation had been buried, disavowed. No medals, no honors, just silence and erasure. And yet here she stood, not in a classified bunker or secret command post, but among the ordinary ranks, surrounded by those who had no idea what she had lived through. The younger soldiers began to notice the commander's change in expression. They saw how his face paled, how his eyes darted from the tattoo to her face, then back again, unable to reconcile what he thought he knew with what stood before him. The mood shifted, confusion spread, followed by unease. The same ones who had chuckled under their breath when her uniform came off were now silent. Their smirks vanished. No one dared speak, but everyone felt it. Something had changed. This wasn't humiliation anymore. This wasn't some punishment or disciplinary display. It had become something else, something much more serious. For those who still didn't recognize the mark, the sudden shift in atmosphere was disorienting. They looked to their seniors, to the officers, to the commander, seeking cues. But even they looked rattled, unsure of what to say, caught between military structure and the unspoken rules of intelligence and power. The tattoo had turned the entire dynamic upside down. It challenged everything: rank, perception, control. And it did so silently, without a single word from her. The commander stood frozen, his gaze locked on the ink running down her spine. His chest rose and fell unevenly. The arrogance he wore like armor moments ago now stripped from him faster than her uniform had been. The silence around him stretched, but in his mind, noise thundered, memories, rumors, classified briefings, all colliding at once. The mark he saw wasn't unfamiliar. It wasn't decorative. It was dangerous. It represented a lineage of operatives so covert, their existence was omitted even from the most secure databases. Yet here it was plain, permanent, undeniable, etched onto the back of the woman he had just tried to humiliate. He stepped closer, slowly, as if afraid that what he was seeing might vanish. The soldiers nearby, once spectators to a public shaming, were now unsure whether to remain at attention or look away. A few dared to glance at the commander, noticing the tremor in his hand, the change in his breathing, the absence of dominance in his stance. It wasn't respect that kept them silent. It was confusion, and something deeper beginning to stir, a kind of fear they couldn't yet name. The commander squinted, trying to remember. He had been briefed once, years ago, during a crisis no one was supposed to talk about. Failed mission. A black site overrun. All agents presumed dead. The only shred of information that survived the report was that tattoo. Its design committed to memory by a handful of high-clearance officers, like himself. It was said to belong to someone who had gone rogue, not because of disloyalty, but because she'd seen too much, survived too much, and could no longer serve a system that buried its own. She shouldn't be here. Not in this unit, not in this base, not under his command. And yet she was not hiding, not resisting, just standing there, spine straight, expression unreadable, as if daring him to act while knowing he wouldn't. And he couldn't, because now he wasn't looking at a subordinate, he was looking at a classified enigma. Someone who had been erased from paper, but not from history. Someone who had slipped through the cracks of silence and found her way back into the open, not as a ghost, but as a soldier once more. His lips parted, but no words came out. He thought of addressing her, of asking her something, anything, her name, her origin, her rank, but he knew those questions would be meaningless. Whatever identity she had once held had likely been buried years ago. What stood before him wasn't a private or a recruit. It was a symbol of everything the system tried to forget. A reminder that not all warriors wore medals, and not all heroes were officially recognized. He turned his head slowly, scanning the faces of the others around him. Some still looked confused. Others looked shaken. No one laughed. No one moved. It was as if the entire field had become suspended in time, with her at the center of it. A quiet reckoning in flesh and ink. His hand twitched, as if reaching for the radio clip to his belt, but he didn't grab it. What would he report? That he had ordered the public shaming of a covert operative protected by top-level intelligence? That he had exposed someone meant to remain hidden? That he had turned a routine inspection into a catastrophic mistake? The mark had spoken louder than any protest, any retaliation. And it had done so without permission, without intention. It didn't need words, it had history. And now, everyone present would have to live with the weight of it. The tattoo wasn't just a relic of the past. It was a key, a symbol known only to those who had earned the right to understand it. Its pattern, seemingly decorative to the untrained eye, carried a precise language of its own. Embedded in its spirals and intersecting lines were unit numbers, mission code names, dates, and regions of operation, all encrypted through symbolic arrangements. And it wasn't a mark someone could fake. It had to be earned, often through brutal selection processes and missions that left most dead or permanently broken. Only those who survived the worst of the worst were branded with it, not as a trophy, but as an unspoken warning to others. The emblem at the base of her spine identified her as a member of Tier 0 Echo, an unofficial detachment operating far beyond the public scope of military intelligence. No personnel records, no acknowledgments, no photographs. Only scars, stories, and that mark. The operations she had taken part in were never meant to be declassified. Missions behind enemy lines, deep asset retrievals, and ghost assignments in failed states. The kind of work that didn't just require skill, it demanded total erasure of self. Operatives chosen for Echo weren't supposed to return to normal units. They weren't supposed to reappear at all. And yet here she was. Her presence meant either one of two things. She had gone rogue or she had been abandoned. Forgotten by the very system that had once trusted her with its darkest secrets. Either possibility was equally damning. If she was rogue, she was dangerous. A liability that no chain of command could control. But if she had been left behind, if her name had been erased while she still drew breath, it meant the military had once again sacrificed one of its best and pretended she had never existed. Her tattoo was not just her identity. It was her proof. The commander's posture had changed, but so had the whispers behind him. A few officers at the edge of the formation had begun to realize what the mark meant. They weren't certain, but they sensed it carried weight beyond imagination. Their eyes darted from the tattoo to each other and back, questioning everything. One of them, a junior intelligence analyst assigned to the unit just weeks ago, stepped forward, breaking formation without being told. He had seen the emblem before, on a redacted image buried in a digital archive he wasn't supposed to access. His mind was racing. The symbol was listed under a security lock that required presidential-level clearance. If that symbol was now in front of him, exposed in full view, something was terribly wrong. She remained quiet, unmoving, giving no explanation, offering no justification. She didn't need to. The ink spoke for her. Her story wasn't written in words. It was embedded into her flesh. Every line etched on her skin was a testimony. Every curve of the design was a date someone else had forgotten. Every detail declared what she had done and what had been done to her. Those who knew how to read it would understand. Those who didn't weren't worthy of knowing. The weight of that understanding settled differently on everyone present. For the commander, it was a realization that his authority had limits. For the soldiers, it was a humbling reminder that true strength often comes silently, without rank or ceremony. And for her, it was a reclaiming, not of power, but of truth. Whatever assumptions had existed before the inspection, about her status, her worth, her past, were now shattered. The ink had become a bridge between what was visible and what had been kept hidden in the shadows for too long. The change in the air was immediate. What had begun as a public display of power and humiliation had suddenly shifted into an atmosphere thick with uncertainty, unease, and growing respect. The soldiers who had once stood as passive observers, some even entertained by her exposure, now found themselves unsure of where to look. Their earlier smirks were gone, replaced with furrowed brows and downcast eyes. No one had expected this. No one had anticipated that beneath her uniform was a truth bigger than rank, bigger than protocol. Something sacred and unspoken that had just been revealed without her uttering a single word. The tattoo had silenced the laughter. It had dismantled the illusion that she was weak, ordinary, or out of place. It spoke of a world beyond their comprehension, of experiences and sacrifices none of them could even begin to imagine. And the way she carried it, without shame, without boast, only made the moment heavier. There was no arrogance in her stance, only defiance and quiet strength. She didn't seek validation. She didn't demand reparation. She simply stood there, allowing them all to see what they had chosen to overlook for so long. Even the senior officers weren't immune to the change. Their rigid postures had softened, their expressions now guarded, careful. They knew what this meant. If they acknowledged the tattoo, they would also have to acknowledge that they had failed to recognize her, that they had misjudged someone who clearly operated far above their understanding. But the real shift wasn't just in leadership, it was in the collective mindset of the unit. The soldiers who once whispered behind her back now looked at her with something between fear and reverence. She wasn't just a peer anymore. She was a mystery they had all walked past without ever noticing. And now that mystery stood exposed, not in weakness, but in undeniable proof of resilience. Her silence became the loudest voice in the yard. It screamed of betrayal, survival, and power that didn't need permission to exist. Those closest to her in the formation began to step back slightly, not out of disrespect, but in subconscious recognition that they were standing in the presence of something or someone different. One young recruit, barely out of training school, kept his eyes glued to the ground, ashamed of having once joined in the gossip that painted her as a misfit. Another officer, known for his sarcasm and superiority complex, now struggled to maintain eye contact with her, his smirk long gone. No one dared speak her name aloud. A ripple of realization moved through the field. She had been among them all this time, quiet, unnoticed, underestimated. But the truth was, she had chosen to blend in. She had chosen not to reveal who she was, not because she had anything to hide, but because she had nothing to prove. And in a place obsessed with rank and validation, that was a power in itself. The transformation wasn't loud. It wasn't announced with fanfare or orders. It was subtle, internal. A shift in perception, in posture, in presence. She had gone from invisible to unforgettable. And not because she demanded attention, but because the truth, once seen, could no longer be ignored. The hierarchy that had governed their daily routines, their unspoken alliances and divisions, suddenly felt flimsy. Titles meant less. Uniforms became just fabric. The Real authority stood barefoot in front of them, spine inked with secrets, and not a single word of complaint on her lips. Her presence now demanded a different kind of silence, one born not of fear, but of awakening. The identity she had concealed for so long was no longer a secret. The tattoo had spoken for her in a language only a few truly understood, but its ripple effect had reached everyone on that inspection field. The truth of who she was, of what she had survived, what she had accomplished, what she represented, couldn't be hidden anymore. And with that truth came an irreversible shift in how she was seen. No longer was she just another quiet soldier in the formation. She was a symbol, a survivor of something far more intense than any of them had known. And now that her truth had been exposed, so too was the lie they had all been living. They had treated her like she was beneath them, dismissed her strength, mocked her silence. But now those very traits they belittled were recontextualized. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was restraint. Her distance wasn't arrogance, it was discipline. Her anonymity wasn't due to insignificance, it was protection. Every moment she had chosen not to respond, not to retaliate, not to defend herself now looked like supreme control. They realized she had allowed them to think they were superior. She had let them misjudge her. And they had. The power dynamic had inverted, without her ever raising her voice. She didn't demand their respect. She didn't need their apology. She had nothing to explain, nothing to prove. But the very fact that she had once been stripped in front of them, and now stood taller than them all, made it clear that everything had changed. The commander's orders, the public humiliation, the cruelty they witnessed or participated in, would now follow them like shadows. Because from this moment on, they would not be remembered for their rank or their performance, but for how they reacted in the presence of someone extraordinary. And she was extraordinary. That mark on her back was more than a tattoo. It was a badge earned through pain, blood, betrayal, and endurance. It represented a part of military history that lived off the grid, and a class of soldier that most never even encountered. The kind that didn't ask for parades or medals. The kind that disappeared after the job was done, often presumed dead or erased to preserve operational secrecy. And yet, here she was, alive, forgotten by her system, stripped by her own peers, and still standing with unshakable composure. The commander, now visibly rattled, stood off to the side, uncertain of his next move. He was no longer in control. Even the authority of his position couldn't match what she embodied. If he punished her further, he risked backlash, not just from within his ranks but possibly from beyond. Because someone somewhere knew exactly what that tattoo meant. Someone had authorized it. Someone high up had sent her on missions and then buried her existence. That kind of truth didn't stay hidden forever. And now that it was exposed, any move against her could bring consequences far beyond a simple reprimand or transfer. The other officers stood paralyzed by indecision. What could they say? To apologize now would feel hollow. To walk away would feel like cowardice. Yet they knew that saying nothing would mark them as complicit in her humiliation. A few lowered their heads. A few kept their eyes on her, as if trying to understand what kind of strength it took to stand there, bare and unashamed, after what had just happened. Her quiet dignity had dismantled the hierarchy without her needing to lift a finger. She had taken everything they threw at her and remained unbroken. More than that, she had revealed that they never truly knew who she was. And in doing so, she forced them to question not just her place in the unit, but their own understanding of what strength, honor, and identity really meant.